Hey y'all, welcome to the Volunteer Matters podcast, where we're in a series right now where we give you strategies, tools, and tips for an extraordinary volunteer program. So we're continuing that today. Today we're tackling a topic that pertains mostly to organizations managing volunteers across multiple locations. So today's topic is how to train volunteers consistently at scale. And this is important because volunteers are in some way the face of your organization. They serve service recipients, and their success in their role also contributes back to your mission success and how they feel as a volunteer at your organization. So let's get started.
Yeah, so we gotta, aside from the training of a volunteer is important, obviously, for their ability to deliver on whatever service that they're providing, but it also is for the confidence of the volunteer as well. So it's sort of a double whammy. It greatly impacts the volunteer's experience if they feel like they actually can be good at their job, they know what they're doing, they know what the ins and outs are. But training can be a big pain. Um, so, we have lots of organizations that have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of volunteers, and that they might be operating across many locations. But even if you're just in a single location and you've got thousands of volunteers coming in, trying to figure out how to train somebody at scale is kind of a unique situation. It has its own challenges, if you will. So obviously, if you take everything and you take it really small and say, we only bring in one new volunteer every month, and they just come in and they walk with me, and I do a one-on-one in-person training with them, tell them everything they need to know, answer whatever questions they have, and that's fantastic. But that model breaks very quickly once you have, a lot of volunteers all at once, or a larger number of volunteers over a longer period of time. And the other part of that too is requiring training to sort of be like handled by an individual. What does that
Sorry.
mean?
I have no idea. I accidentally clicked the stop button.
All right. So should
Okay.
we start over, or are we good to
I
continue?
think we'll continue.
All right. So
So
we'll just
sorry.
leave that little flub in there too. No need to edit that out. We're all human. So, uh, so the one of the things with training is, and it's like with anything else in any sort of procedure or operation, we want to make sure that there's a certain level of standard of quality, and to make sure that the content that we're hitting on these trainings is consistent. And when you start doing things en masse, sometimes you can lose that quality and that consistency. So we do want to make sure, like, what is the core curriculum of this? We can't just wing this, so we have to have these things be well defined. Um, and then you also have to consider diverse audiences, like different backgrounds, cultures, levels of experience. So like when we're going into designing the trainings, if we're sort of winging it, sometimes we're either very good at adapting that into the moment, but then if you have to do it at scale, you sort of lose that. Or sometimes you're not good at it from the beginning because there isn't that level of diversity. And once you broaden your audience, the diversity exists. And so you have to really consider that when designing your different trainings, to take that into account when delivering it to broader audiences. And then, of course, there's the logistical aspects to it. So, um, like, how are we actually going to deliver on this? Does this need to be in person? Can it be done virtually? And how can we train? Does it have to be one-on-one? Can it be in groups? Can it be virtual? Does it have to be at a particular time of day or in a particular place? And then lastly, is once things start getting bigger, you can't keep control of everything. You don't have insight into everything. Again, to use the extreme ends of the spectrum, if I'm the only person that delivers training and I do them one-on-one, it's very easy to know whether something's been done, whether it's been done well, at least from my perspective, right? My boss might feel differently. But once you start saying, well, we need this to happen in many places, many times a year or many times a week even, then how do we maintain oversight and make sure that we have a consistent process surrounding training? Right down to things just like, well, when were the trainings? Who was signed up to come? Who actually showed up? Who completed the training versus those people that never attended? And how do we mark them off as being, there's all of those elements that come to it, that once you start getting things bigger, it starts to fall apart. So we have to consider, all of those challenges when designing something at scale.
Yeah, so when we talk about designing scalable volunteer training, there are a few principles to keep in mind. The first one is if there's something that you can standardize, go ahead and standardize it. So the core training content that is universal across programs or locations, make sure that that's like the same training you have, the same topics that are covered. And like for example, if you do 5Ks across multiple states, right, there's probably an aspect of each volunteer role that's consistent, that you can build one training around and then distribute it.
Yeah, you
So
look at it like you have a core curriculum that applies to everybody, right? So you have these broader trainings where the messaging, like an easy example to use your 5K thing to build off of that, is that there are things about attending a live event, how you greet people, what you dress, how you conduct yourself, what the overall mission of the organization is, what the purpose and let's say tenor you want to have with the event, where letting the volunteer know where what impact they're having on their mission, even right down to when you're there, what are the things you're saying to people as they're coming in that every volunteer needs to know. Even if it's again if it's event driven, not that I want to be too much on events, but if these events all have a standard procedure for volunteer check-in and if there's any incidents, how to report them and things, if you any standards that you have that apply to everybody, you have that core curriculum and you say, okay, well, that's something we can organize into something that we apply to everyone. Sorry,
yeah,
didn't mean to jump in on
no,
your
no, that's
thing
good
there.
because that made me think something else. Just the consistency is important for, like, let's say a volunteer goes to multiple events a year. It's good for them, like the same principles be reinforced, and it, yeah, unifies everyone and the mission. Well, at the same time, another key principle is to allow flexibility when necessary. So, I guess we could stick with a 5K example. There are definitely some roles that require special training, I bet, and also depending on the location, maybe a different region requires different training requirements. So, um, be able to deliver training in a flexible manner is also important. You have to have the two working together.
I'll give another example. So we have an organization that provides support animals to veterans with PTSD. And the training that somebody would need to have when actually working with the animals is going to be very different than the training for a volunteer who's preparing meals for veterans when they come in to be trained with their animal. So you could have a core set of trainings that let them know what the organization's mission is, where they source their dogs, how they place veterans, the outcomes of these different studies, what percentages of their vets end up coming entirely off of medication after receiving an animal to deal with their PTSD, like all of that great information and core curriculum. But then somebody else may need a training on how to handle dogs, right? What the to dos and not to dos with the animals. And then someone else may say, oh, okay, well, if you're preparing meals for veterans, here are the things that you need to consider. We have dietary restrictions, and these are definitely no-go foods. And so the role dependency is where you're talking about having that flexibility to say, well, unless you're in a specialized role and you may need something different than everyone else.
Yeah, awesome. So another principle is to use technology, to leverage technology to streamline the delivery of training. There are so many tools out there that can help you deliver these trainings in an effective way. One major tool that we use is a learning management system. So if there are training courses that you can put together, then a system that tracks completion for volunteers is very, very helpful. That way you don't have to, well, you first of all know that they got trained. You can even incorporate quizzes and things at the end to make sure they retained what they watched in your videos. And yeah, it also goes back to that consistency piece. So everyone's going through that core training online to streamline things.
And there should be somebody, another part of that consistency is there should be someone overseeing training. Like it doesn't need to be their full-time job, but somebody needs to be looking at these trainings for consistency and making sure that they're up to date and making sure that it's relevant to what the volunteers are doing, because things change over time. So it can't be static. We have to have somebody sort of that has governance over this. It's their responsibility. They're accountable for that. Even again, even if it's not part of their or their entire job.
Yeah, I do like that. And the last thing I'd say is to train the trainers. Someone who's overseeing training needs to be trained on, you know, what the training, most up
Yeah,
to date things are and like how to deliver it effectively.
if you have like here's a great example. Well, there's a few examples, but if you have trainings that require people to do things in person, then train the trainer is the best way to do that. So you can have key people stationed, let's say all over the country, and we've got trainers training other trainers. But you also can have, team lead type volunteers where they receive specialized training because, let's say, day of, you're coordinating a group that's coming into, you have regular groups coming into a food bank warehouse, for example, and you may actually have somebody who has been trained to deliver the orientation to volunteers that are day of. So I think we did another episode on trainings versus orientations. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could have, there's a difference between the training that you would do in advance, and then sometimes we'll actually do like a micro training when people arrive on site. And so you could have a training for people who are responsible for delivering those in-person trainings, like at the start of a volunteer shift or something like that. All right, so you touched on some of the tools that you might use, like a learning management system. If you hear LMS or thrown around, that's what that is. And a learning management system is really just a tool that allows you to do online courses. So online courses can contain all sorts of media that people can review, absorb. They can be fun, they can be interactive, they could be videos, or they could be actual interactive animations. And there are lots of tools out there that help you to create these things. You could have slide decks, things that they have to read, or they could just be videos. You could have tests and quizzes. You can arrange them into multiple lesson plans and they can step through. You can have volunteers be able to provide feedback as they're going through these trainings, so they can actually comment in different areas and maybe even pose questions. So there are lots of learning management systems that provide like really, really interactive and wonderful tools to make sure that these things that you may in the past have delivered in person are actually translating via a virtual experience. So the feedback loops on it are important, and there also should be consistency checkpoints. So we want to make sure that we're monitoring the delivery and the compliance with these. Like for example, in our product, we'll actually track which jobs require these trainings. Who said that they were going to complete the training, because that's part of our opt-in strategy when people are signing up. Who actually attended, who didn't attend, how do we remind them that they were supposed to attend? How do we notify administrators in these different areas that you have volunteers that haven't attended the training yet? So you can have good systems like ours to make sure that all of that's, we have those checkpoints and those checks and balances in place. Um, and the other aspect to this is um, on a what some people will resist virtual training, and they'll say, well, we like doing the training, we don't want to use those tools, because a big part of our training is how we build rapport and develop relationships with people. And I believe that that is wonderful, and you should absolutely have in-person interactions. There is nothing that can replicate that. With that being said, you can separate the core real training aspect of that from the interactive relationship building aspect. So just to use like a really obvious example, if you have a 3-hour training and you require people to come in on Saturday mornings from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. to do this training, and really about 30 minutes of that is the networking, interactive, feel good, conversational kind of thing, then do a 2.5-hour online training that they do prior to arriving, and then have it be more about networking and relationship building when they get there. Because the overhead in doing a virtual training is relatively low, right? People can do it from their phones, they could do it from work, they could do it from their office, they could do it on their lunch break. And when you end, you don't have to have a trainer there. You don't have to schedule somebody to be there to check them in, to check them out, to deliver the content, right? So all of that creates these barriers to getting the volunteer up to speed in the things they should know. You can save all the fun stuff for when they're up there in person, right? And then they can get rid of, not get rid of, but they take care of the hardcore training stuff before arriving, and then have a meet and greet where you may go over a few more other elements. And there also, I do also want to acknowledge that if you're listening to this and you go, our trainings on our, we're an animal rescue organization, and our trainings are like how to hold and feed newborn baby raccoons, you know, and there's no way I could deliver that virtually. And so there obviously are some cases where you just can't replace an in-person training, but you should just be thinking in your back of mind, where can I do that? And it will ease the burden on us as administrators in the scheduling and delivery and staffing of who's delivering that training. And it will give a lot more flexibility to the volunteer to define, to say when they want to take that training and how they want to take it, how they can fit it in their lives. So it benefits everybody when you think along those lines.
Question. It's
Yes.
just sparked a question. I hear there's a lot. It's, um, well, if you move your training online and volunteers can take it at their leisure, like at home on their computer, how do you know they are retaining anything? How do you know that it's successful? People get really
Well,
nervous about that.
first, I will tell you that we have lots of people that will do trainings, and they'll train like 20, 25 people. And I would ask you have the same problem when somebody's standing there in person and they're like
True.
spaced out and they're not listening. Even one-on-one. I mean, many times I've been on calls where somebody's sitting there live on a call, listening to somebody do the training, and then they ask a question that was literally just said 5 seconds before because they just spaced, right? So we
Yeah.
have that problem no matter what. Obviously, if they're standing in the room, you're like, oh, I see you. I know you're here. Like I can make eye contact with you. I see you nodding your head. But in a virtual training, like how do we address those? And there are ticks. There are tricks that you can use, and a lot of these learning management systems, they offer them. Like one of the things you can do is you can remove the controls to fast forward through videos. So in essence, they have to at least listen and at most listen and watch the video. But then you could just put in certain checkpoints to make sure they're retaining it in the form of a test or a quiz. And it doesn't need to be a lot. You can ask a few questions. These are the critical elements. Like as an example, we have a lot of customers that have volunteers working with children that are mandated reporters as their role as a volunteer. And if you don't know, mandated reporting is based on how to detect signs of child abuse, and that you're obligated to report those incidents to certain authorities. And so you can go through segments about what signs are, what appropriate touch versus inappropriate touch, and you give all of these segments and what to do, who to report them to, what your obligations are legally. And you can ask somebody at the end of a 35-minute training, you can ask them 5 questions, and it'll make sure that they were paying attention to the 5 major points in that training. Or it might be a more in-depth training. You know, we have some customers that their people will go through a 2-hour training on that, and they might have 4 quizzes and a final test on it. And it is one of those things where we're not placing an undue burden on the volunteer. They literally are you paying attention? Because we said 3 major things in this one segment, and as long as you can answer those 3 questions, we know that you were paying attention. So it works equally as well
Mm.
as looking into a crowd of people and seeing people nodding and shaking their head at you.
It might even work better now that you explain it like that.
Might even work better.
But
It is like taking all of us got used to this during COVID, but everybody's kids were taking online courses and taking tests online, and that's still extended to this day. So there are a lot of like university courses where this is the only way they deliver some courses now. So it's
yeah.
something that the industry really did not only catch up to, but sort of surpassed where they were very rapidly because of the demand for it. So the tools that are out there, very good.
Awesome. So the last piece I want to talk about is just how to measure how successful your training program is. So you do have to come up with key metrics to track. So for example, how many volunteers complete the training, how many volunteers actually get started in their role, or do they like stop in the middle of their training and never get started? How are their test scores if you have like a quiz that they take? And what are your retention rates like when they do get started in their roles? Can you think of any other metrics that would
Well,
indicate like the success?
I mentioned one of them earlier is just if people have feedback on the trainings. So, and feedback in general. So, what was their onboarding like? And you don't have to do this for every single person. But again, some of these learning management systems, they have great tools for people to be able to comment and provide feedback right within the context of taking the course. Like you can say, I've completed this section. Do you have any feedback or comments? Rate this section. So there are
Hmm,
tools like that built right within the
good.
learning management systems. But then even after that, just generally querying volunteers and saying to them, what did you think about your overall experience? And people will put in there, like, I was wholly unprepared. Unprepared. Is that a word?
I don't
Unprepared.
know. I think
I just made it up. I
it
was
sounded good.
unprepared. I wasn't trained well enough to do this, right? That's a terrible feeling for a volunteer if they felt that way. I needed more information on this. And sometimes it's just, oh, that's interesting. I didn't really even think that we would have to train somebody on that, but we really do. Like to use the animal rescue organization thing, sometimes when we're in our, or any nonprofit, we're in like our flow of what we do. We're wholly embedded in this process, and we can sometimes lose sight of what are the things people actually need to be trained on. Like even within our own company, we have this issue. Like I had somebody the other day I was talking to, and they didn't realize that when looking at something on our screen, there's a little plus next to a person's name, and if you click on it, it expands down and shows them additional information about that person, and they missed it. They didn't know to click on it. I was like, that isn't even something I thought we would have had to have put in a training. But let's put a note in there. Let's adapt our training to let people know that when you click on that, it expands. And then when you click to export that report, it includes all that information. Something I didn't think that I would ever have to point out because like we're used to it, right? This is how our system works. So the same thing goes with anything else. So if I'm responsible for working with an emotional support animal, or I'm working in a food bank warehouse, or there are things that you'll end up learning through that feedback to say, oh, and this is why having somebody have ownership over training, reviewing this feedback so that you can adapt and add these things. The other part is that if you do have digital or electronic systems for these, it's very easy to amend a training, add an additional question, put a slide in there. Like even if you had recorded a professional training video to walk people through some aspect of your nonprofit, and then there was something that popped up, you could just insert a slide after that one and say, note, if this happens, then that, this is something we've learned, and then they can move on. Just pop in a slide. And then you may want to incorporate it later on in a more comprehensive review. But it's really easy to adapt and move forward when you have things digital.
Amazing.
All right.
Well,
So
that's
did we hit on everything we wanted to hit on, Sophia?
yeah, we did. We hit on all our bullet points.
All right. Well, let's recap then. I love the
Okay,
recap.
great.
See if I could do it. You can give me a score afterwards. We'll give you my feedback. All right. So training is something that we need to place some emphasis on. We need to make sure that we have a core curriculum that would apply to all volunteers, and recognizing where we can split things out to say this is specialized per a volunteer's role or the certain type of activity that they're doing. That when considering scale, there are things that we know will break if we try to do too many volunteers over too long a period of time, or in too many different locations with too many trainers involved, where we want to make sure that it scales without breaking. So that means putting together consistent programs that are well thought out to consider the diversity of the different types of trainings and the attendees on those trainings. So that means good course design and documentation. The second thing we talked about is that sometimes in-person training is a requirement, and we understand that, but always be thinking along the lines of how can we pull out things that can be done virtually, online, in advance of, from your own phone or home or office or on your lunch break. So we should be always looking to do that. Even if we recognize the value of the networking and relationship building aspect to training, that we can always have a separate event where people show up to focus on that, and maybe some of the training aspects that would be better done in person. And that we also want to have good systems in place to do this. And we know that there are systems like VolunteerMatters and learning management systems that can help you to automate these things. And then most importantly, being able to measure them as well. So who promised, which of these things require trainings? Who promised they were going to do the training? Who's done it? Who hasn't done it? And what is the feedback from people as they've been going through these things, so we know how to amend it and modify it over time. So I think that did, how'd I do?
Good. I'll add one more thing. I can't believe we didn't talk about it, but well, it's just a small piece on what to measure. It's just like a lot of times trainings have to be repeated after a certain period of
Oh,
time, and that's another thing to make sure you measure and systematize.
you
Is
know
that a word?
what? That is, yes, that is, it is now. That is something, let's take a minute on that because you just pointed out something really, really super important. And I'll tell you why it's important. When you introduce the idea that trainings have to be repeated, right, that adds an order of magnitude more complexity, especially if you have a lot of repeat volunteers. So if you said everybody has to be volunteered in this no matter what, and we do it once when they start, as soon as you start going, okay, and by the way, they have to retake this training every year, every 2 years, every 5 years, and 40% of our volunteers are repeat volunteers. That means we can't treat every volunteer the same. And we don't even know if volunteer A versus volunteer B when it's time for them to do that because not everybody comes in at the same time. So it's literally every single person is unique. Well, when did you take the training? When do you need to repeat the training? So as soon as you start going and we have multiple locations with hundreds or thousands of volunteers, everything falls apart. And you go, well, now I don't know anything. Because before, at least if I said it's required of everybody and they just have to do it at the start, that becomes something we're like, okay, all right, I can keep track of that. And then once you go, no, it needs to be repeated over time. And guess what? Every single person, their time to renew it is going to be different than the person next to them. That becomes a nightmare to track. So that this is when systems become an absolute imperative. And you have to have a system tracking who is this volunteer, what trainings have they done, when did they last do them, what things are they currently assigned to, do those trainings require them, have the policy periods expired, do they need to repeat it, are they attempting to sign up for something new, does this new thing require something they need to be trained on and have never done it before, or have they been trained on it before but they need to repeat the training, or is the training still good? Like they were trained soon enough ago that they don't need to do it again. So that's the time when you should start going, you need a system to track that stuff, because especially if it's a compliance requirement. So another good point. So training, if it's a training for the quality of the volunteer's experience and the quality of their ability to deliver on that service, this is all very, very important, super important. But if the training is to make sure that you're complying with some, you know, my organization requires us to do this, or my state or my local government requires me to do this, or the federal government requires me to do this, because there are things at the federal, state, and local, and even like if you're a part of an association level, where these are actual requirements that could have very bad legal or other implications if they aren't done. So this is why having a good system in place to show that you can audit it, you can see exactly who all the people were, when they took the trainings, what they were assigned to at that time, when those things expired and needed to be renewed. It's almost impossible to accurately track that at scale without a sophisticated system doing that. Again, my unbiased thing, I don't know of another product in the space that does that as well as Volunteer Matters does, even close. So the reason why we, just a little backstory, and then we'll end this from there. But the reason why we're so good at this and why we've focused so much on this is in great deal thanks to all of our YMCA customers. So YMCA's came to us back in 2015 and said, we have this problem, what I just described to you. They're like, we have all these volunteers, they're working with children inside our facilities. There's locker rooms, there's swimming pools, there's changing areas, there's summer camps, there's before and after school care. We've got volunteers all over the place. We've got facilities where they're in the facilities, outside the facilities. We've got checkpoints when they're coming in and out. And our primary focus is on keeping our kids and families safe. So we've established these policies that they did actually, again, kudos to YMCA's. They were doing this long before they were state or federally mandated. So like they came out with things like in 2019 with the Safe Sport Act federally, and then states have been catching up to all of these things. Only after horrific things you saw in the news and everybody started saying, maybe we should be doing this differently. The YMCA's were way ahead of the curve on this. And they put out a national RFP, and we ended up starting working with them back in 2015 to address this very thing. So it does get super complicated. So systems in those cases and the right ones is absolutely critical. So I'll leave it at that little bonus material at the end.
Awesome. Yeah, that well, I will say your recap was amazing as always, and it's become a little challenge now at the end of our episodes for you to just recap it all.
That's
But
right. You
thank
caught me on
you.
a couple of points.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, everyone. We're excited to see you next time, and please subscribe, leave a comment, and share this with your colleagues, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, everybody.